Welcome to the Product Design Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Coelen, founder of UX Cabin, where we create world-class web and mobile apps. I'm excited to bring you a behind-the-scenes look into the lives of some of the most interesting and talented people in product design. We'll get strategic advice on how they got to where they are today and things they wish they would have known earlier in their career. Thank you so much for joining us on the Product Design Podcast. If you have spent any time in UX, you probably are really familiar with our guest. We are so happy to have Sarah Doody here, founder and CEO of Career Strategy Lab. Sarah, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks, Seth. I am excited to be here with you this morning.
Absolutely. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about just who you are, what you do, where you live, what some of your hobbies are?
Yeah, so I am officially, I guess, a user researcher and experience designer. That's what I've done in my career since the early mid 2000s. I worked with different startups in New York City, and I also created my own kind of research and design consultancy in 2012, which is hard to believe. That was 10 years ago. But more recently, I've fallen into the world of career development, career coaching, specific to UX people. And these days, I spend most of my time running Career Strategy Lab, which is a job search and career accelerator for people that work in UX, tech, product. And we're really focused on helping you navigate that journey of getting your next job, whether that's 3 months from now or 2 years from now, and you want to learn this so that you're ready in case unexpected opportunities slide into your DMs, so to speak. I still do UX research and design consulting, but it's very limited at this point. And I just spend all my time doing that for my own company. And when I'm not working on the business, I'm normally out on the ski slopes. I'm a very big downhill skier. And then I took up mountain biking in the summer. I just can't get away from the mountains. And I actually just got back from skiing in Chile, which was incredible. We were like on volcanoes and they were steaming when we were on them. So it was pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah. Very hardcore.
That is amazing. So I think it would be awesome to kind of start back at the beginning and kind of hear your origin story for how you got into the field of UX.
Yeah, it's probably similar to many people's who are at the stage of their career as I am, in that I didn't know UX existed. I was always kind of creative and technical, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I thought I'd pursue neuroscience of all things because I was really interested in medicine and the brain. And I ended up deferring from the university I was accepted to. And that's kind of a major pivot point in my career because I kind of on a whim got into some graphic design, which led to web design, which led to a little bit of coding. And then I read a book called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. And that led me down this path of, information architecture. And I thought, I want to be that person that kind of sits in the middle of everything and makes sure that what we're building and designing is actually what gets launched, right? So that led me down this path. And it's interesting because back in the day, which makes me feel so old, a lot of us did kind of everything. A lot of us were generalists, but I remember thinking to myself, if I really want to get good at like this research and kind of more experienced design and not so much pixel perfect stuff, I thought to myself, I need to drop the pixel perfect visual design. And so I did that. I don't even know when, probably the late 2000s or something. And I really focused on research and experience design. And I guess a common question that people ask me is like, how did I get this entrepreneurial bug? And I think it was from working internally at startups and realizing how many mistakes they make. And also in the consulting I was doing, like being on the sidelines and having a kind of front row seat to so many companies in different industries and realizing like, I could probably do that. So that's kind of the short-ish version of how I got to where I am today.
That is really cool. I think, even you saying like getting into experience design in the late 2000s even feels like way, way even ahead of its time. Like, because when I was getting into the career stage and when I worked at an agency in 2012 as a front end developer, there was designers and developers, and there wasn't really this distinction of like graphic design and UX design. It was just like designers.
Yeah.
It's just like developers develop and designers design. And then there's just some like startings of like, here's a really interesting take on like, UX. Like it's not just as important how it looks, but it's also important how it, the experience. And everyone's like, whoa, that's so good.
And it's so funny to think back because, back when I was starting out, and I should add, I never went to school for any of this. Sometimes I can't even remember what my degree is in. I think it's business and marketing or some hybrid of that. I did all of or 95% of my university online and through the literal physical mail. Long story. But it's because I was working at a full-time job at a software company and I had this opportunity to get this job. And I thought, well, I have to finish my college. So I didn't ever study UX. Boot camps were not a thing back then. And it was totally self-taught and just, I think, hours spent doing all this. And in hindsight, like a little bit of natural skill at design, like that sixth sense, so to speak.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting how you said you got an opportunity at a software agency. How did that come about?
It was through relationships, which I cannot stress enough how important those professional relationships are. Long story short, I honestly think I was 20 years old and I knew a guy that worked at a international software company. At the time, it was called Mentor Graphics. And I think I might butcher this, but what they did was create the software that engineers use to design chips. And he worked there and he needed like a little web designer to work on some marketing websites or something. I was living in Texas at the time. I moved from Texas to Portland, Oregon, sight unseen, and took a full-time job at this company. So at this company in Portland, Oregon, there were 3,500 employees around the world. And little Sarah showed up. I had my own office, like a door that closed. This snack cart would come by every day and they paid for my college. So it was kind of too good of an opportunity to turn down. And it was interesting because it gave me a taste of 9 to 5 and what it meant to work in a big company at 20 years old. And I think also that planted a seed in my mind. Like, I don't want to do this, but this is awesome experience. So I'm going to kind of work it for a few years. And it worked out really well. So yeah, that's my weird story of how I got my education and experience.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah.
I think you're totally right in that like relationships are everything. Someone said your network is your net worth. And
nice.
if you can find kind of like those back doors, those referrals, those introductions by meeting people, that can really open a lot of doors for you that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
And, I love that quote about your network is your net worth. And I would kind of say, yes. And I think one thing that I see a lot of professionals doing, especially people getting started with their career, is they stress out about the size of their network and acquiring, 100, 200, 500 LinkedIn connections is some magic number that someone said you have to reach. And my stance on that is it's more about the quality of the relationships that you have with those people than the number, because the point of a network is to be able to send a message, phone someone and say, hey, I need advice on this, or do you know anyone hiring here? And if you just have 500 people that know nothing about you and they're, virtual strangers, are they going to respond to your email? Are they going to pick up the phone? Probably not. But if you have 60 people that actually know your name, would recognize your face, and vaguely know some stuff about you, in my opinion, that's far more valuable than 500, connections on LinkedIn. It's like you're a developer, so you're familiar with the term like vanity metrics, right? And I think LinkedIn connections or Twitter followers is kind of like a vanity metric,
Right. Totally. Yeah, I think you can definitely get focused on the wrong metrics. And it's like, all you need is one connection, one person who points you to the right person. And it's very easy to focus on quantity and want to like go as wide as you possibly can. But if you can go deeper and maybe invest in some conversations or some meetups or some conferences, those are the relationships that are probably going to be more fruitful than just a random connection request and then like expecting that person's going to give you a favor a year down the road.
Exactly. You don't just want to be a number. You want to be kind of memorable to those people that you reach out to. So maybe they can help you.
Totally. So thinking about the next steps in your career and your career trajectory, are there any like specific highs and lows that you remember from starting point to where you are now?
That's a great question. One of the things that, looking back, a lot of people say to me, like, were you always designing your career and treating your career like a product? And consciously, I wasn't, but in hindsight and probably subconsciously, I was. So here's an example. I was working at a startup company in New York, which no one's ever heard of probably. And there was kind of conflict on the product team, like egos and all this stuff. So I got kind of banished to the technology team where I was supposed to help them develop kind of like this search engine, for lack of a better word. So I was kind of doing all this research and I thought to myself, this is interesting, but this is not what I want to be doing. So I literally made a keynote presentation of like a career roadmap for myself and what I was doing currently, what I'd done in the past, what I wanted to be doing in the future. And it truly mirrored like a startup pitch deck or a product roadmap because it had like competitors is the wrong word, but like people I looked up to who did the same things I wanted to do, I guess role models. It had very actionable things like I need to develop a presence. So I need to be doing 3 blog posts a month or whatever, like very tactical. And I think if I had not done that, who knows what I would be doing. But that kicked like the wheels to be doing that for the rest of my career. And I actually found this keynote presentation a couple of years ago, and it's quite eerie, the goals and aspirations that I put in that document to what I've done in the past and am doing now. So I think at the time, I just thought to myself, I can design websites, I can design products. I'm just going to design my way out of this kind of like corner they stuck me in, and it worked.
That's really, really cool. I remember like, and you look back at your career and you think of all of the different scenarios that like felt bad or but led you to something better. Like I remember the first job that I got in agency world, and I didn't really know like much about like salary or, what, I don't know. There wasn't really anything. So when I got in there, I got kind of in low, but it was great because it was an entry level job and I was learning a lot of things. Right. Mm-hmm. But like the thing that happened is that I got an opportunity to go make a pretty decent salary jump at a new company that I didn't have the opportunity at that current company because it was just too big of a like salary jump for them to justify it. But that career move really helped propel me in a lot of ways that like if I was making a higher starting salary, I wouldn't have like taken, the new job, and I would have kind of been stuck in kind of just doing things that weren't going to like propel my career.
Yeah.
And
kind of like in a plateau. You're just rolling along. Yeah. Coasting.
Yeah. So all those things, that you look back and you think of like, oh, this should have happened this way or this should have happened that way. I think certain situations can really like set you on a trajectory that don't seem good in the moment. Maybe you don't like where you're at. Maybe you feel like you're being underpaid, but that can spur you on to greater and more amazing things than you even imagined were possible.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I could not have scripted, what I am doing and where my career has taken me. I mean, the specifics of it, but looking back, I see how all the dots are connected in a really interesting way that in hindsight, it's not totally surprising that I'm doing what I'm doing. But yeah, I love looking back and just reminding myself of how I got here, because for me, it helps me deal with those situations that come up like in the present moment when you think, oh, everything's going to burn and this whole business is going to crumble and I'm going to like have to become a ski instructor or something and just remind which wouldn't be the worst thing. I actually want to do that. But it reminds me, this blip that I am encountering now will make sense or work itself out when I look back 5 years from now,
Yeah. So when did you go from working for companies, startups, agencies to being an independent consultant?
Yeah, I did that almost 10 years ago last month. So I was working at a startup and I actually quit via email on a Friday. I was sitting there. I'd been thinking about quitting for a while. And I just remember thinking to myself, I do not want to come back here on Monday. And so I just gathered the handful of things on my desk and left and quit over email. And that was that. I didn't have a plan. I, was living in New York. It was an expensive, life to fund. I was living on my own. And then I can't even remember if they told me I could stay 2 weeks or whatever it was. I think there was a couple of weeks there. And then shortly after my official last day, they contacted me and were like, can you do some consulting for us because we need your help? So it kind of worked out okay. And then I booked a ticket to Europe and went to Europe for like 2 or 3 weeks. It was amazing. I don't necessarily recommend quitting via email with no plan, but I had enough of a social presence and a network that was not just numbers on a screen, but was people who actually knew me, that I was able to, pretty rapidly establish some freelance business and things like that. Yeah. And that was 10 years. So I did that for 10 years. And then in 2017, I guess we could go back earlier than that, but 2017, I was trying to solve my own problem of my own inbox being flooded with the question, how do I make a portfolio? And I say this all the time, and I know it sounds a little harsh, but I would think to myself, if you can't figure out how to make a portfolio, I don't know how you're going to succeed as a UX designer. Because to me, it was just make a keynote presentation and tell a story. And I guess it's kind of indicative of that whole phenomenon where they say if you're really good or an expert at something, it's so obvious to you, but it's not obvious to everyone else. And so I just ignored these questions for a while, and it got so out of control that I thought, okay, I'm going to teach a 1 hour lunch and learn style workshop over GoToWebinar or whatever it was at the time. And then everyone will learn how to do this and no one will ask me about this again. And the world will know how to make portfolios based on my 1 hour lunch and learn. And so long story short, I made this landing page. I set up a payment processor. 85 people signed up. So I was like, oh no, this is too many. So I shut it down, made a wait list. And then I actually made the workshop. So I didn't make it until I saw if people bought it. And then I taught it, and then people started to get hired. And then they also said, this was awesome. Can you make it like 4 weeks long? So then the entrepreneur in me was thinking, this is an opportunity and I need to run with this. And that's kind of the origin of where my career shifted into helping people with their careers. And now what is known today as Career Strategy Lab. So yeah, it's been a wild last 5 years or so, that's for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so cool. The opportunity, because there's a very real scenario where you just kept ignoring those and you just went on your merry way and everything, probably turned out fine, but just in a very different context. But like,
yeah,
I always look back and think of like, how many of those opportunities, like, did I successfully take, or how many of those did I like completely miss and like, whiffed on?
I think part of it, was the user researcher in me always like reading all these emails and piecing together all of the stories and problems that people were having. And then finally, like it all clicked for me. And I'm still doing that, all day, every day. But I think, if I didn't have that research background, I could definitely see a scenario where I didn't do that or just wrote a Medium article. And even if the article had received a lot of recognition or visibility, let's say, I still don't know if I would have had like the drive to take it to that next level and put myself out there to, teach people how to do this. So yeah, anyway, people have always said I'm a really effective storyteller, especially kind of visual and written storyteller. And I think that's really what we teach when it comes to portfolios, whether you're making a presentation, which is your portfolio, or research findings, or a pitch for your product idea, it's all kind of the same. So I see how those skills have kind of given me the superpower, for lack of a better word, to help people figure out their story and hopefully get hired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. What's the biggest blocker when people come to you and ask about, their portfolio or like the thing that they just can't like get past?
Yeah. So universally, no matter what stage people are at, I think one of the big things it boils down to is confidence in their work, confidence that they could actually do the job if they were hired, and confident in the projects they've worked on. Because a lot of time people ask me, okay, this project didn't launch, or it launched, but I don't have data, or it launched and it failed. And they're worried to include that because they think they are a failure because of that, right? And so whether people have been working in UX for more than 10 years, 0 years, 4 years, that's a big part of it. And then there's a ton more, but that's kind of the overarching block that people have.
Yeah, that's really interesting. One thing I wanted to go back is to when you were quitting your first job and you said you had built up a decent network and social presence, and really curious what you did to build that up during the first part of your career to kind of give you that leverage that you could feel confident enough to fall back on.
Yeah. So it's funny. I just noticed on Twitter yesterday that I joined Twitter in 2008. So I've been on Twitter for a while, and that is definitely in my situation. And you have to look at it in the context of it was 2008. So there was not as much noise on Twitter, especially in design Twitter and all that. So because it was more of a smaller, tight-knit community, I was able to form a lot of great relationships on there pretty quickly. And then as the years went by, I acquired more followers and am perceived as like, I guess, a leader because of that, and because of stuff I've done too. So Twitter is a big part of it. The other thing I did very strategically was made a website. I was not using WordPress. I was using something else called Text Pattern, which probably doesn't exist anymore. But I was able to create this blog, and I just got into the habit of writing. And it was very quantified. It's like, I need to write this many articles a week or a month or whatever it was. And, everyone says to me, well, how do you know what to write about? And, I wasn't like an expert at anything. I was just little Sarah, mid-20s or something. But I would read articles in like Fast Company, or I would devour like reports on the overlap of technology and social media, or social media and life and the impact on that and society and all this. And I would just write articles that would respond to and sometimes summarize parts of these articles and reports. So if I was, when you read an article and you think, oh, I'm going to leave a comment. I don't know if people leave comments anymore. I would leave a comment, but then I would use that as kind of a launching pad for what I could write about in an article, kind of responding to that. So a lot of my early writing was just like, hey, I read this article and here's what I think and blah, 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 and you should go read it. Then I started to develop my own thoughts and opinions and stuff. And that, I think, was the most important thing I did, because it gave me the confidence to put my thoughts out there on the internet, which is scary, and develop my skill as a writer, because I think that is such a timeless skill that I fear we are losing, as so much communication is being kind of done through emojis and limited characters and such casual approach because of instant messaging and Slack and everything, And so I think this long form writing has been really key for me, not just with an audience, but communicating my ideas to clients or stakeholders or to people in my online courses, So that's how I did it. And then the other thing I did, because the entrepreneur in me thought, if I ever want to sell anything, I need an email list. So I got MailChimp and started making an email list and started sending out a newsletter every week. And I mean, we're close to issue 300, honestly. So that's been going on for a while. And that just started to like organically create this brand and this following. And then I kind of did the same with YouTube and LinkedIn. Like my first YouTube video, I look like a deer in a headlight, but that video has like, I don't know, 60 or 80,000 views now. And people find me through these early videos. So I guess I would tell people, don't be afraid at putting yourself out there. You can always delete it, but you never know what's going to come from this stuff. Because I would say writing those articles led to some pivotal moments in my career. So I wrote an article called Why We Need Storytellers at the Heart of Product Development. That was on my blog. And then it got a lot of like hits on Google Analytics. And so on a whim, I contacted UX Magazine, which still exists today. It's digital. And I said, hey, you want to publish this blog post that I wrote? And so they did. And then I distinctly remember sitting on my couch in my apartment in New York on like a Friday night and looking at TweetDeck. I don't know if people still use that, but my TweetDeck was like, it was like a waterfall with all the mentions and stuff, because this article like went pretty viral. But that article led to people from like Stanford and Fast Company and General Assembly reaching out to me. And because of that article, I ended up creating, I mean, there's a few degrees of connection from the article to this moment I'm going to tell you about, but I ended up being asked to create and teach General Assembly's first 12-week X program back in New York in 2012. But if I had not written that article, like the connections that happened that led to that General Assembly thing would not have happened. And that was like that's a big deal. So that's another example of, why it pays to take risks and put yourself out there. And also, I know I'm rambling a bit, but so many people are focused on building audiences on social platforms like Instagram and all this, but that's not always super great for being found in search. Whereas a website that you own is very valuable. And so long form content, is more likely to be found than an Instagram post. Even a YouTube video, I would argue. So yeah, I'm a big fan of long form written content and kind of owning your audience and your platform.
I think that's great. And I think, probably even more so than like confidence with portfolio creation is confidence with writing, because just like you said, no one feels like they have complete knowledge around any given technical or UX topic. And it's like, okay, well, if I'm not the expert, I'm not going to write on this. And that's the obvious, natural response to that. But in some of the things that have been somewhat popular for me that I've put out there or written or tweeted, it's just a hot take and it's very easy to disagree with. And that's kind of the point of it, right? The point of it isn't that you're right. The point of it is that you have someone who wants to talk about it and disagree with you about it and go back and forth with you about it. And that has its own merit. Obviously you can get into clickbait and stuff like that, but I'm just talking about just having a stance on something and going through with it and saying I think this really specific thing about, material design, or I think this process is a bad process. And just if nothing else, you are having something a little bit more interesting to read than just general information about X topic. So yeah, I don't think you have to have full knowledge of something. You can just write about what you know today, or you can take an opinionated stance and change your mind later.
Yeah. And I think, tell me if you've experienced this, but a lot of times when I receive the digest of UX content from medium.com or whatever, a lot of it all sounds the same. A lot of the articles are just very surface level or clickbaity, or just renaming some process with a new name. And, and I think the takeaway is that there's so much surface level content out there that if you just take the time to be 5% more thoughtful and more in depth, people will respond to that. And that's what people tell me about a lot of the content I create, is that it's down to earth, it's very actionable, and it's not surface level. I just don't tell you your portfolio should tell a story. I tell you how to tell a story, right? Or your resume should be skimmable and scannable. Okay, I can tell you how to do that, So think about the things that maybe you can go deeper in and niche down and, play around with content on those topics. And I think the other thing, you kind of touched on this, is acknowledging that trolls will exist. People will not agree with you. And that doesn't mean you're a bad person or a failure or whatever. But, I've definitely had to develop a little bit of a thicker skin and, just let that stuff roll off my shoulders and go to yoga more. Because people are mean out there. But totally. You have to not let that stop you from getting your work out there, because those people don't matter. They're just having a bad day or a bad life or something.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. And no, I completely agree with you on general UX article digest. To be honest, I'm not even excited to click on, UX articles anymore, because it's how many 5 essential step processes to your UX process that you need to adopt can you read? And it's this is all very, very, very surface level. Where's the nugget in here? Where's the ingenious part that I was promised from the title or whatever? But it's just there's just such a low barrier to entry for just writing something a little bit more interesting or a little bit of a unique take. Even if you're just skip wireframes and this is why you should do it, that would be interesting for me to read. I would
Yeah.
like to hear a compelling reason on going some outside of the orthodox like UX process or something.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a definite overwhelm. I share your sentiment with like just not even wanting to click on the articles and content sometimes. But hopefully we can encourage more people to put original and
Yeah,
deeper, more mindful content out there because I would read that stuff.
totally. Totally. And I have never met someone who makes a commitment to, you know, writing some content and doing it somewhat consistently that has ever looked back and been like, that was a huge waste of time. I regret it.
Yeah.
Everyone pretty much exclusively that I've ever talked about that has done it for any amount of time is like, no, this literally changed the trajectory of my career and
Yeah.
I owe everything to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, like writing, you're going to have to write in your career for as long as you have a career, whether it's writing emails, writing reports, writing research, discussion guides, whatever it is, writing your resume. And the act of writing and becoming a better writer will help you in so many ways. And it truly is a little concerning to see the impact that our very short form communication style might be having on our ability to write long form content.
Yeah, no, this
Just a coherent email. I mean, it's a little scary to me.
there's always those questions of should designers code when really what we should be asking is should designers write?
Yes.
And the answer is yes, because like like you said, even if you're just writing up a really well written email or a long form like Slack post to your team that people are going to read, like these are things that you kind of all take for granted and no one puts any like thought or strategy or I don't want to say that you don't put any work into, but it's like this is the majority of the things you're going to be doing. You're going to be communicating, you're going to be writing.
And it can make your life easier. Like if you can write an email and get an answer from a colleague in one email, that's going to save you and them so much time versus sending an email that is not clear, that is too long, that is meandering and requires a week of back and forth. Like that's such a waste of time. And if you can be a good writer and communicator and get to the root of questions or ideas, etc., your boss will notice, So I would really encourage you to try and become a more succinct writer. Maybe just get Grammarly to start. I mean, that's a great way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've kind of talked about your career trajectory and how you kind of put a product strategy behind your career, and would love to dive into a little bit more about, your product strategy, career life cycle, and kind of the different stages of your UX career and how you can view all of those through your lens and framework.
Yeah. So no matter what stage people are at, whether, you're getting started or you're in the middle of a career, or you're 15 or 20 years in, I think having worked with so many people through, the getting ready to apply and application and interview stages, I realized that there's really three things that people need to focus on. And if you imagine kind of a Venn diagram, you can think of the three circles as there's an element of product that you need to work on. There's an element of marketing that you need to work on. And there's an element of sales that you need to work on. And, whether you have a product that you want to get on Shark Tank, you need a product, you need marketing, you need sales. So same thing for your career. When it comes to your career, like the product element is you. It's like, what skills do you have? What experience do you bring? What features? And I think one mistake that a lot of people make, and you probably hear this too, is people try and learn too much, and then you're not really great at anything. So a feature that a lot of people try to add to themselves is, oh, I guess I need to learn to code. Well, do you? Like, so that's like the most obvious example I could give for that. But getting really clear on what features slash skills you need to develop now versus 2 years from now, is very important. And it's like a product roadmap, right? You can't have all the features next week,
Right.
and you have to make sure you do the features in the right order. It's like if you build a house, a 1-story house, and you imagine you want to do a 2-story house in the future, like do an addition, there's probably things you want to do to that 1-story house initially to make sure that it could like support the weight of the 2-story house. I'm not a general contractor, but that's what I imagine. But same thing for your career, right? So then when it comes to marketing, that is really like your marketing materials. So you think for a person seeking a job, it's things like your LinkedIn profile, your resume, your portfolio, or, work presentation of examples and things. It's cover letters. It's even like emails that you would send for cold outreach to people on LinkedIn, et cetera, right? So then the third part of the Venn diagram is sales. And it kind of goes back to where we started, relationships. Like, everyone says sales is about closing the deal, and it is, but to close the deal, it's largely about relationships and being able to articulate what you're looking for, negotiate, and have the right people in place that you could go to or get introductions to help you kind of get what you want. And I think one mistake people make is they don't look at all those three things like in a holistic way. And it's kind of like a stool. Like if your product has a lot of cool features and they work really well, and you don't have a solid resume or portfolio or LinkedIn, then the stool is going to fall over. If you do have an awesome portfolio and you have great skills, but you don't do well at interviewing, like for sales, that's going to be a problem.
Right.
So when you think about all the three of these things together and then layer on product principles like minimum viable product, because I always say like you need a minimum viable portfolio and a minimum viable resume, because honest to goodness, you can probably get hired with the minimum viable version, because I've seen enough resumes and portfolios to tell you that the bar to stand out is really low. And that's why you don't need to spend 3 months perfecting your portfolio. So principles like that to draw from product, and even testing, right? Like when you try and perfect everything, what does it do? It delays the quote launch of your job search or, your attempt to get hired. So if you take the minimum version of your resume or portfolio and put it out there and start applying, that gives you the data to figure out, is it working or is it not? But you won't know that until you like detach yourself from this proverbial perfect version and put out the good enough version, because you can probably get hired with the good enough version, but just people don't think like that. And so my hope is with this kind of product of you treating yourself as a product kind of mentality, it helps people kind of get out of their own head and do for themselves what they do with the products they work on, right?
That's really cool. I think that's a really unique frame of reference for how to approach job searching and career development, because everyone that I have ever met hates designing their own site and their own portfolio, because it's just like too close to you. It's too personal, and you can't separate it as like a product. It's almost like this needs to encompass everything that I am as an individual. Therefore, I will never launch it because it will never be good enough.
Yeah. No, it's like a startup founder who's so close to the idea. And that's why they need, people like me to come in and help them, get to the core of what you're doing, because your product can't be for everyone. It can't have 200 features on day one. And it's like you're your own worst client. But if you can if you can look at it this way, I think it helps take some of the emotion out of it and helps you kind of look at your career from the sidelines, sort of like if someone else was advising me what to do, what would they tell me? So hopefully that helps some people realize how maybe they're stuck, and maybe adopting, these MVP attitude and, launch early, get feedback, and then iterate can apply to your resume, your portfolio, your job search, interviews, everything.
Yeah. I think another interesting point that should be considered is like, you want to think about what you want for sure, but you also want to think about what the person on the other end wants. Because if you can give them what they want, then that's most of the battle. Because people who are hiring you, they want to make sure that they're not going to look stupid by hiring you. They want to make sure that they're making a good informed choice and a good decision. So how can you build in either reassurance or speak to the answers that they want to see, or show them the type of work that they want to see? And those things are all different based on if it's a startup, if it's a large corporation, if it's an agency. Like, so it's almost like you could even build a persona of like, if you want to apply to a small agency, or if you want to go work at a startup, there's all of these like, UX type persona things that you can tailor your portfolio or your resume or your website towards to reassure that person that they're getting what they want.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And you reminded me of something that I think is important to bring up. It's, so many people on their resume or at the top of their LinkedIn, in a cover letter, they make it about them. It's like, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm so passionate about design, and I just want to change the world and save the world with design, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's great that you're passionate about design. But first of all, that sounds like so many other people's little statements. Second, if you look at this like from a jobs to be done framework, and you're trying to get that hiring manager to pay attention to you, Sarah being passionate about design and wanting to change the world doesn't tell me how I'm going to do and help them with the things that they listed on the job description. So it's like the job description, as much as UX people love to complain and bash and shame about job descriptions, I just want to say, like, let's get over that, because like, can we all agree there are a lot of job descriptions that are not good? Okay. Yes. And there are job descriptions that are decent, and they hold clues for what you should be including in that cover letter, in that cold email. Even things like rewrite a bullet point on your resume to include words that they mentioned, or rearrange the bullet points, or remove bullet points that maybe don't align with that. But thinking about layering in that jobs to be done mindset too is really important, because like there's a product I used to use called ClickUp. It's like a project management tool. Yeah. And they have billboards like in so many airports, on buses, everywhere. And they say something to the effect of like, we will save you 1 day a week. That's compelling.
Right.
But if the bus drove by me, or the billboard in the airport said like, we want to save the world through productivity, I'd be like, what the heck does that mean?
Right. It's not specific enough.
It's not specific to me. But when I see the bus that says this software will save me 1 day a week, I'm like, I could save 1 day a week. What is this? And it's compelling. So yeah, maybe that example helps some people.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think the other point you mentioned about like job descriptions, and it's like at this point in my career, when I look at a job description, I can see that 50 to 70% of it is fluff, right? It's just like, this is just recycled things in there. And if it's like a product design position, and they're like, you also have like experience with all of the Adobe suite products, it's like, okay, this is just being recycled. You really just need to be good at like, Figma or whatever. But it's like, as you read more of these, you get to and apply to more and understand the industry more, you can really cut through the dross of what really needs to be spoken to on a job description. And it's like, you'll have 10 bullet points where it's like, needs to work well with team, needs to be passionate about this. It's like, okay, like those are all like unquantifiable things that like should be like, yes, you should be a good communicator. Like who's going to be like, can't apply to this, not a good communicator. It's like, there's so many things that are just should just be obvious, but to your point, you have to pull out those specific clues of like, what is the unique thing about this job post that I can bring to the table and I can tailor my cover letter or my resume towards. That's really going to get you to that next level.
Yeah. And, you know, you as an individual can decide how you spend your time, and you can spend your time screenshotting crappy job descriptions and posting them on LinkedIn and getting people to like join your complaint fest. Or you can like accept the fact that this is how the world works right now, and job descriptions are not going to change overnight. So you kind of just need to get over it and read the job description, because a lot of people don't, and find those nuggets, like you said, and then like literally print it out and highlight it if you need to. And then I guarantee you are going to stand out, you know, above everyone else that quick applied and didn't read the job description.
Yes, absolutely. So maybe in the last few minutes, we can kind of talk about our last point of, you know, myths that UX professionals believe about recruiters and hiring managers.
Yeah. So a big myth, I think, and we see this in people's tweets and LinkedIn posts, is that recruiters don't really understand UX and can be a waste of your time, right? And maybe you yourself or people you know have had recruiters kind of come into your LinkedIn messages or email with opportunities that you think, this has nothing to do with my skill set. Like I get things still to this day, coding things or like art director. And I think to myself, they didn't even read my LinkedIn. So I think we have to take a step back and acknowledge that there are different types of recruiters. There's recruiters who work at kind of large recruiting and staffing agencies, and there's recruiters that work internally at companies like Shopify, Spotify, Facebook, Meta, whatever. They have internal recruiters that work for their companies. And that distinction is different because many recruiters who work at staffing agencies may not understand UX as much as a recruiter who works at Spotify as a recruiter focused on UX. So the distinction, I think, is that those recruiters at staffing agencies know the lingo, and recruiters internal are more likely to understand like the mechanics of the role. And so I think when people reach out to you in your inbox, that's kind of the first question you need to ask yourself. Like, do they seem like they know what they're talking about, or do they not, you know? And then I think it's up to you to kind of take the reins of the interaction and ask questions back to clarify the role or the opportunity, so that two things: you don't just automatically ignore the message because you think recruiters are evil and I'm not going to reply. And on the flip side, you can also answer questions earlier in the interview process so that you don't get 3 weeks in and realize, oh, this is really what they want, or this is really an in-person job and I wanted a remote job, right? So treating recruiters almost like a consultant who's working for you, I think is a good mindset to have, instead of kind of just doing whatever, you know, they tell you to do on a phone call or inbox, you know, and like taking control of it. And it's this whole idea of like owning your career. I actually did a conference last year called Own Your UX Career. Maybe we'll do one again next year. But that attitude with recruiters, I think, is so, so important, because it will help you save a lot of time, but also not miss out on opportunities just because you deleted the message and didn't even, ask one question or entertain it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And another thing I've learned with like recruiters, staffing companies, positions is everything is negotiable. So you see something that comes over and you're like, oh, doesn't fit what I want or whatever. Maybe it's like 2 days remote or like, I don't know, if you're depending on what you want and how good you are and what you have to offer, like everything's a negotiation.
Especially today.
Yes. It is very hard to find the right talent. So if you can bring to the table what they're looking for, the core of what they're looking for, pretty much everything else is negotiable.
Totally. And the other thing I would say, back to relationships, these relationships that you choose to or not to establish with internal or external recruiters, those are really valuable because you may not be a fit, or it may not be good timing for you to take a job right now. But 3 years from now, if you're laid off or you realize you've reached a plateau, those relationships are so crucial to you kind of accelerating your job search, because you won't be starting from a blank canvas, so to speak, and you could potentially, go back to those people. So it wouldn't hurt to exchange
build
one
a relationship,
email, have a phone call, so they're not just a name in your inbox or you're a name on their spreadsheet or whatever. Like just have that first conversation, get to know each other, and then you have a foundation for the future.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah, this has been a fantastic time chatting with you. Wanted to let you have the last word on anything that you want to say and leave the audience with, but really appreciate the time and you coming on here, giving us all of this information from your career and your experience and your strategy.
Well, thank you. I have a whole iPad full of notes now that I'm going to have to go read myself, ideas that came from this discussion. But I think that like one of the biggest things, or if people were to just write one thing on a Post-it note, maybe something to leave people with would be to invest in yourself as much as you invest in the products that you work on, because you're the most important product you're ever going to work on. So you got to remember that. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you, Sarah. Until next time, and really appreciate the talk.
Thank you. Bye, Seth.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us today on the Product Design Podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation, be sure and go follow our guests. Let them know they did a great job and you learned a lot. More to come in the following weeks as we bring on new guests. Please hit that subscribe button so that you will get these podcasts and learn a ton about the product design community. Excited to see you next time. Thanks.